Hello everyone, today I will take a look at the melee units of each faction. Well, not all the melee units, but to be more specific, as you can see from here, the grunt units of each faction. With that I mean the cheap melee fighters. Not in every faction cheap, but we will get to that. That you will usually be able to spam in fairly large numbers and will make up the bulk of your army. Just like with the last video, I will mostly be talking about the campaign because I simply do not really have any experience in multiplayer. The first unit we will get to is the Spearman. Honestly, a absolute wonderful example for what such a unit should be. It's a really strong unit, and that is of course because it's absolutely mighty 6-1 javelin ranged attack. Of course not, but it is actually fairly nice to have a bit of poke available to that unit, so it's not completely useless in range combat. Also allows it to get a bit of chip XP down if you have to kill a fairly strong enemy unit and it doesn't have a ranged attack. A good example, for example, being an Orcish warrior. Now, what makes this unit so good? Well, in contrast to some other high-level loyalty units, it does not actually have high resistances, it just has the base 20% that humans get. What it does have however, is a special ability on its Spear Strike, namely First Strike. So, even if this unit gets attacked by an enemy, it will still get the first attack off, which can be really huge. Funnily enough, especially against fellow loyalists, because the cavalry unit, not the scouting one, but the horseman unit, has a charge ability which doubles damage, and like all horse units is weak against pierce damage, and first strike against such a unit is absolutely wonderful to have. But even against common enemies, it's always nice to get the first move off. The other thing that makes this unit a bit special is that it actually has 3 different advancement paths. Most units gets 2 at most. And we will start with the Javelineer. This unit, I must admit, I almost never go into because I simply don't really see the worth in a unit that can't rank up to 3. However, if you ever get one promoted in a multiplayer match, I would assume that that is your best choice because you will not get the XP to level it up another time anyway. If we go down to the stats and compare to the Spearman again, we will see that it only got 1 extra damage on its spear attack, but its javelin got a massive buff. Well, that is pretty much all there is to that unit. It is essentially a bit stronger spearman that is also capable of actually fighting in range. One thing of important to note, however, is its pierce resistance. It actually gets the same 40% pierce resistance as the halberdier line, which actually makes it quite a formidable foe against many low-level archer units, because it dishes out about as much damage as them, if not a bit more, and takes way less in return. The second advancement path would be the swordsman, where the spearman trades out its spear for better armor and a sword. Not much to be said about the unit. It has basic defenses against blade and impact and an 8-4 attack. It's simply a solid frontline unit. That trend continues with the Royal Guard unit, which has the same resistances and a bit stronger melee attack and of course more life. The one thing of note with that unit is that it actually gets a movement of 6, while the rest of that advancement line only has 5 points of movement. Lastly, there we have the pikeman. Well, in that case, the soldier simply trades the spear for a larger spear, and just like with the swordsman line, loses its ability to throw a javelin, but that was always just a small aspect anyway, because the damage was negligible. The good thing about this part is that it keeps its first strike ability. It is, however, also to be mentioned that it also keeps its pierce weapon type, which is not exactly ideal, especially because in campaigns you will often be fighting against rogue necromancers or liches, and undead units tend to be quite resistant against spears, especially the skeletons. The last advancement type, however, the halberdier, honestly just looks awesome. Like, that helmet, wonderful. It also has a huge advantage of getting a bladed attack. So not only does it have its piercing first strike, which is actually slightly stronger than 4 hits of the Royal Guard, only by 1, but the strength is actually a bit higher. But if it actually faces a unit that is really strong against spears, it does have the backup option of the blade on the halberd. Now we get to the next faction, the elves. Now, you might be wondering, why are only 3 elves to be shown? It is simple. The alternative advancement path for a fighter is the captain, a unit that I will cover in a later video where we'll go over leadership units. So I will be only covering the champion path. The elvish fighter is a very all-around fighter. Not only does it get average melee attack, but it also gets a below average, but still not negligible ranged attack, with the 3-3 bow attack and the 5-4 bow, of course. There's not much to be said about the Elvish hero. It fulfills what it's supposed to fulfill. Doesn't have any resistances, just the standard minus to arcane of elves. And in contrast to many other elven units, it's not capable of actually hitting the 70% defense. No matter where you put it, it will at most have 60%. That is actually part of the reason why some people do prefer to more so go for archers than for fighters. But I'd say that at least quite a few fighters are still always useful to have. Its fighter advancement then being the Elvish hero. Nothing really changes, everything it has just gets a bit stronger, and it's the same still for the Elvish champion. The only thing that really needs to be said about the Elvish champion is that its attack is a 9-5 attack, and there are not many attacks in the game where you actually hit 5 times, so that is actually one of the best units you can have to benefit of the strong trait, because you get a whole 5 extra damage added. Here we now go to the Orcish Grunt, the absolute cannon fuzzer unit par excellence. It's very cheap, costing only 12, but in turn is also extremely weak. It has a 9-2 melee attack and that's it. And like essentially all orcs, no resistances to be found. Now, it might sound bad, but that is a wonderful unit to spam. You can just spam them out, and well, from time to time you will actually get lucky and get one promoted to the way stronger orc warrior. Especially if you manage to fight at night, where the hits can actually become quite formidable. The orc warrior changes to a 10-3 hit. The singular hits of that unit are quite strong, especially at night, but once again, compared to some other of the level 2 units, it's still quite the cannon fuzzer unit. It's still lacking the resistances, has a pretty nice health pool though. The Orcish Warlord though is a really fun unit. Not only does it get a bow attack to actually fight back a bit on range, not much, but enough to actually put out a bit of hurt or finish off a weakened unit. But its melee attack, it becomes really strong. 15-3, that is a lot of damage, especially at night. The singular damage of each hit is extremely dangerous. Wouldn't say it's the most dangerous unit that the orcs have, but it is simply a very good mainstay unit. It does what it's supposed to do and it does it well. Now we got to the dwarves, who have an absolutely wonderful unit. Not only do they get a melee attack that, well, is pretty strong, 7-3, about the same as the humans, but it from level 1 on already has access to the hammer ability, which gives it the good option of alternative damage, which is huge against undead units, where the hammer will just shred them. The other thing of note is its resistances. The Dwarvish Fighter is actually resistant against everything. It has a slight resistance against magic and even higher against all kinds of weapon damage, which is wonderful. It sadly actually has to pay for that in some way, and in the fighter's case that would be movement, which is quite limited, especially if you're not in the mountains. Now, it's not like it's especially fast in the mountains, but other units are usually slower in the mountains, so by comparison, the fighters actually come over better. It advances to the Steel Clad, which mostly just brings an increase in damage and quite a bit in health, but also has another 10% to both blade, impact and pierce, so it becomes even better at taking care of especially undead units, mostly the skeletons, because they will be barely able to damage the Steel Clad, while the Steel Clad's hammer will just shred them. The last advancement is actually one of my favorite units, the Dwarvish Lord. I just absolutely love how the pixel art of that one looks, and well, as a unit, it's also wonderful. Now, it mostly gets a very cute headshot, which it's not going to do much, but hey, better to have a bit of range damage than have nothing at all. The hammer, well, already deadly against skeletal units, will become an absolute menace to them. And even if it's not an undead unit, the 15-3 battle axe, well, is the same as like the halberdier or even the orcish warlord. So it's not like it's lacking in damage there. What it also is not lacking is in defenses, because it got another 10% to blade damage. So if it's fighting, say, a Royal Guard, that fight will be, well, actually quite tanky by both sides, since the Royal Guard resists it as well. But 40% plus such a huge health pool is nothing to scoff at. If you put such a unit in the mountain, they will survive a lot, unless they get bombarded by a lot of mages. Following the dwarves, we will go over to the undead, where we just have the very basic skeleton units. In itself, nothing much special about that unit. Has the submerge ability, but you will almost never use that. Deep water is not really a territory you want your skeletons to be at. But what makes that unit special is its resistances. On one hand, it's really weak against arcane and fire magic, but it also is extremely resistant against cold magic. For weapons, as you might imagine, blades and spears don't really do much to the skeleton, especially spears not, but anything that has an impact like a club will not only do its proper damage, but actually, well, do even more damage. Skeleton can advance to two different units, the Revenant, which is, well, honestly, a skeleton but better in every way, slightly more HP, one more hit, resistance stays the same. Or it can go into a Deathblade. A Deathblade is actually quite squishy, only having 39 HP, but it gets one more movement point and actually 2 extra X-Strikes. That puts it up to a total of 40 damage, which honestly is sometimes even equal to some level 3 units. Take for example the Royal Guardsman, gets in level 4, there's only a 4-point difference in damage. So this thing will hurt, and it will, well, also be better able to reach the targets it's supposed to hurt, but be aware that that unit is quite squishy. Also, if you go for that, you will not be able to get up to a Dwarf, which of course is just a better option. It does a total of 84 damage if everything hits, and has a lot of HP, which makes this unit very, very good at crushing, let's say, loyalist forces, because as long as you're mostly faced with their soldiers, they can't really do much to it. Like, take a horseman, it will charge at you, but even with its double damage, 60% pierce resistance almost turns it to nothing, while at the same time it can hit back very hard. The only thing that is of course important to be mentioned with that unit is keep it away from mages. Almost every mage will have arcane or fire damage. The few that have cold damage are usually fellow necromancers. And, well, as we probably all know, every necromancer has an alternative arcane attack. So any kind of magic will usually shred through that unit. Now we will once again get to the last two factions, which I'm not that sure about. First being the Drakes. Now, with the Drakes I wasn't even sure if I should include them, because the Drakes don't really have quote-unquote cheap cannon fuzzer. Their cheapest unit is actually the Scout, followed by the Fighter, who is, yes, a melee unit, but if we go along the advancement path, you will see that they're also quite fire focused. In their case, it's simply a good all-around unit. It can fight back in range, it can fight back, it can dish out in melee, and it is fairly mobile, having only 6 movement on one hand, but not only is that more than most fighters get, but they're also Drakes, so they can fly over most territories for little movement cost. Also, like most Drake units, this unit is quite volatile. Drakes are really not good at tanking damage, since the highest defense they can ever get to is 40%, and they are extremely weak against Arcane Cold and the usual peers, so you especially do not really want to fight loyalists with them. They, however, are quite good against Blade, Impact, and Fire. So, a few factions are fairly easy pickings with them. Take Outlaws. Sure, they have their trappers, but Outlaws will mostly rely on blunt damage. So, against them, they're quite useful. But again, overall, I can't say too much about it, because it's simply not a faction that I've played that much yet. With the Dune people, I was not even sure which one to include. There is actually a cheaper all-around unit that they have, but that felt more like a well, all-around unit or ranged unit, while the Dune Soldier is essentially a more expensive but slightly stronger Orcish Grunt. Um, Once again, I only showcase 2 development paths because the third one would be the officer path. Um, the swordsman line is, well, essentially classic melee unit. You get a strong melee attack and that's it. Their special gimmick is that they get a weaker melee attack that however has marksman, which is wonderful for picking off certain units like Orcish Assassins, who are quite squishy but have very high evasion rates. Their resistances are quite good. Like most humans, they have 20% arcane resistance, but they also get resistance against blade and pierce. But they are kind of like undead, a bit weak against impact units. The other option would be the spear guard, which personally I prefer more. Not only do they have better resistance against pierce, but they get both a really strong first strike ability, but also access to another weapon type in impact. And I'm always a really big fan of having multiple damage types in case your opponent resists them. Well, and that would be all the basic cannon fuzzer standard line units that are accessible to most factions. I must admit, especially with the Drakes and the Dune Folk, I'm not really that well known, so I'm not that confident in my assessment of those. But with the other 5 factions, I would say that they all pretty much fulfill the same role, mostly filling up your army with cheap cannon fodder to protect your stronger units. But they're also nice to have upgraded. None of them will be anything special. Because they are lacking, let's say, the healing abilities of a healer or particularly strong range attacks to break through. They are essentially the personification of boring but practical. They will do their job, they will not be flashy about it, but you will still need them in every army for them to properly work.